My name is Fiona Callaway. I'm 35 years old. Minutes after my divorce was finalized, I stood on the courthouse steps, the manila envelope still in my hand, the judge's signature barely dry, and I called my father. I told him to fire all 27 employees my in-laws had planted inside his company. Not warn them, not investigate them. Fire them that same day. My father didn't ask why. He said one sentence. Send me the report within 2 hours. Security was walking 27 people out of a building they thought they owned. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 6 years to a dinner table where my mother-in-law said something about family looking out for family, something I didn't understand until the night she pounded on my front door, screaming that I had no idea what I'd just done. I did. I'd known for 11 months. I grew up inside the smell of hot steel and machine oil. That was my father's smell. Harold Callaway, before he was a name on a building, back when he was just a man in coveralls who came home every night with metal dust in the creases of his hands. He started Callaway Steel Fabrication in 1987 in a rented warehouse with a leaking roof and one second-hand forklift. I was born 2 years later. By the time I could walk, I was walking those warehouse floors, my small hand wrapped around one of his fingers, the concrete cold through my sneakers even in July. I remember the sound most, the particular clang of steel beams settling against each other, a sound like a bell that never quite finished ringing. I remember my father's office, the one with the desk fan that rattled, the coffee that was always too strong, the smell of pencil shavings from the drafting table he refused to give up even after everyone else went digital. He used to say, "Fiona, a company is just people who decided to trust each other. The day they stop trusting each other, it's not a company anymore. It's just a building." I didn't understand that sentence for a long time. There were Sunday dinners at his house. Not fancy, just roast chicken and the radio playing low in the kitchen. He'd let me sit in his chair at the head of the table, just for a minute, and he'd say, "That's yours one day. Not the chair, the company." I thought he meant it as a joke. He didn't. When I turned 30, he handed me 25% ownership of Callaway Steel. He didn't make a speech. He just slid the paperwork across his desk, the same desk with the rattling fan, and said, "It's yours to grow into, yours to protect." 2 years before that, I'd married Reginald Voss. The contrast started small enough that I told myself I was imagining it. My father's house smelled like coffee and cut grass. The Voss house smelled like candle wax and money, the kind of clean that cost a lot to maintain. At the very first family dinner, my mother-in-law, Delphine Voss, looked at me across a table set with more silverware than I knew what to do with, and said, "Family should look out for family. Reginald's cousins are so talented, it would be a shame not to use them." She never said it outright, she never had to. Over the years, one name after another, Voss cousins, Voss in-laws, people Delphine had handpicked, filled positions across payroll, logistics, procurement, our internal audit department. My father trusted me. He trusted that marriage meant our two families were now one. He approved every hire I recommended, and never once asked why so many of them shared my husband's last name. By the time I noticed the pattern, it wasn't a pattern anymore. It was the architecture of the company. I didn't have power yet. I only had a feeling, cold and quiet, sitting under my ribs at every holiday dinner. The feeling of watching something I loved get slowly rearranged by people who had never once smelled hot steel or walked that warehouse floor. Started small, a missing shipment invoice, a vendor contract that had quietly changed hands to a company registered under Delphine's maiden name. Small enough that I could tell myself it was nothing. Then it got larger. Steel orders that should have passed through 3 layers of approval sailed through on a single signature, Reginald's cousin Desmond, who ran procurement, a logistics manager named Preston, another Voss relation, rerouting shipments to a second warehouse that didn't officially exist anywhere in our company structure. I brought it up once, gently, over dinner. Reginald laughed it off, told me I was being paranoid, told me I saw conspiracies where there was only family helping family. I brought it up again, months later. He went cold, distant, told me I sounded ungrateful for everything his mother had done to help our business thrive. That's the word they used for it. Help. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I stopped talking about it out loud. I started listening instead. One evening, I came home early and heard Reginald on the phone in the next room, his voice low in a way I recognized, the voice he used when he thought no one important could hear him. He was talking to his mother. I heard the word restructuring. I heard the word eventually. I heard him say, "She won't notice until it's done." I stood in the hallway with my hand against the wall, and I didn't make a sound. I realized something that night that changed everything, though nothing on the outside changed at all. To Reginald, to Delphine, to Desmond, and Preston, and everyone else, I was decorative, the daughter who'd married in, the wife who signed what she was told to sign. I was invisible to them, and invisibility, I understood, standing very still in that hallway, is a kind of power. Nobody guards against something they don't think can see them. I started keeping a small notebook, the kind you'd use for a grocery list, and I wrote down names, dates, numbers I overheard. I didn't know yet what I would do with it. I only knew I would need it. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't cry. Not then. I went to bed every night beside a man who was slowly helping his mother dismantle my father's life's work, and I said goodnight to him in the same voice I always had. Somewhere in that stretch of quiet, watchful months, I stopped being the woman they thought they'd married into the family I just hadn't told them yet. I hired a forensic accountant privately. I paid her in cash. We met twice a week in a coffee shop 40 minutes from home, far enough that no one would recognize us sitting together. Her name was Marguerite. She had reading glasses that she wore on a chain and a way of tapping her pen twice before she said anything important. It took her 11 months to fully untangle what I'd handed her. 27 employees, all connected through blood or marriage to Delphine Voss, embedded across every critical department of my father's company. Together, they had siphoned off nearly $4 million over 6 years, through inflated invoices, phantom consulting fees, and a shell logistics company that billed us for warehouse space that was, in reality, an empty lot behind a strip mall Delphine owned outright. Marguerite slid the final report across the table one gray Tuesday afternoon, and I remember the exact texture of the folder, heavier than it should have been, the corners already soft from how many times she'd opened and closed it while building the case. "You could go to the police with this today," she told me, tapping her pen twice. "But you asked me to wait, so I waited." I had asked her to wait because I understood something Delphine never accounted for. As long as I was married to Reginald, any move I made could be framed as a wife turning on her husband's family. Messy, emotional, easy to discredit in a courtroom or a headline, but the moment I was legally free of the Voss name, free of any tie that made them feel entitled to protection, I could act without a single thread connecting my personal life to my professional one. I filed for divorce quietly. I cited irreconcilable differences. I said nothing about the report. I let it sit sealed in Marguerite's office while my marriage ended on paper, one signature at a time. The week before my final court date, I overheard Reginald on the phone again, this time with Desmond. He was laughing. He said the words, "Once the divorce clears, easier to expand," and named a number, a new contract Desmond was preparing to push through procurement the following month. A number in the 6 figures. A date, a name of a shell entity I recognized from Marguerite's report. They thought they were planning a future. They were describing, in perfect detail, a case that was already closed. That night, I texted Marguerite 2 words, "We're ready." Delphine went to sleep that week, the way she always did, I imagine. Certain, comfortable, victorious. She had no idea the ground underneath her had already been mapped, measured, and marked for removal. Marguerite walked me through it in plain language, the way she always did. "Once your divorce is final," she said, You have full authority to act on your ownership stake without any claim of marital interference. We hand the report to your father. He terminates. Simultaneously, we preserve everything for potential litigation in case they try to come back at you. It was simple. It was clean. It was exactly the opposite of what 6 years of Voss family dinners had felt like. 3 days before my court date, Delphine invited me to lunch. Just the two of us, she said. Her voice, over the phone, had gone soft in a way I'd only heard once or twice before, usually right before she asked for something. Ober salad she barely touched. She told me she understood marriages went through hard seasons. She told me Reginald's cousins had families depending on their positions. She told me, gently, that perhaps once the unpleasantness of divorce was behind us, I might reconsider, for the sake of everyone the company supported. I told her I'd think about it. I never tipped my hand. Not once. Not with my face, not with my voice. My younger cousin Josie, 17 and sharp in the way only teenagers can be, noticed something was wrong that week. She found me sitting on my father's back porch one evening, not crying, just still. "You've been different," she said, quieter, like you're carrying something. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. She sat next to me anyway, and we didn't talk, and that was enough. The night before my court date, I drove out to my father's warehouse alone. I hadn't been there after hours in years. I stood on the same concrete floor I'd walked as a child, my shoes cold through the soles, the steel beams overhead settling with that same bell-like clang I remembered from childhood. I almost broke there. I wanted, so badly, to call Reginald and scream every fact I knew directly into the phone. I wanted him to hear it from me, in fury, so he'd feel one fraction of what 6 years of silence had cost me. But I remembered my father's voice at that rattling desk. A company is people who decided to trust each other. I hadn't been trusted. I had been used. And using my own anger, the way Delphine had used her charm, would only prove her right about who I was. I cried there, alone, under the beams, not from weakness, from clarity. I wish this were different. I wish Delphine had been the kind of mother-in-law who would have welcomed me instead of measuring me. I wish Reginald had been the kind of husband who defended me instead of his mother. I wish our marriage had been built on something steadier than his family's convenience. But wishes don't hold up. The report in Marguerite's office does. It was 11:52 p.m., the night before my final signature, and I sat alone at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the only light in the house. Marguerite joined the call 2 minutes later, her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. "Once the decree is entered tomorrow morning," she said, "we release the report to your father immediately, no delay. You'll want to be standing somewhere you can take his call the second it happens." I told her I understood. We went through the final documents one more time. The authorization letters, the employment termination packages already drafted and waiting, the language for HR to use with each of the 27 names. My hand was steady on the mouse. It surprised me. How steady. "You've done the hard part already," Marguerite said, before we ended the call. "Tomorrow is just paperwork catching up to the truth." I closed the laptop at alas, dos tres, ning umaga. I am 35 years old. I am about to become the sole reason my father's company survives. Across town, in the house I used to share with Reginald, I imagined him asleep, unaware that the divorce finalizing in 9 hours would trigger a report that had been sitting, sealed and ready, for 11 months. I imagined Delphine asleep in her large, quiet house, certain that whatever discomfort my divorce caused, her nephews and cousins were safe in their positions, protected by blood the way they always had been. "He'll find out in about 9 hours. She'll find out about 2 hours after that." The house around me was silent. Everyone I knew was asleep. Still living in a version of tomorrow that wasn't going to happen, I stood on the courthouse steps in a gray blazer I'd chosen specifically that morning, the one that made me feel like the person I was supposed to be all along, not the person I'd spent 8 years quietly shrinking into. The judge's signature was barely dry when I stepped outside and called. My father, I told him everything. 6 years, condensed into 4 urgent minutes. The shell company, the phantom invoices, the warehouse that didn't exist. I told him to fire all 27 employees, effective immediately, security escorting each one out before the workday ended. My father was silent for a long moment. Send me the report, he said. Within 20 minutes, HR had a list. Within 2 hours, the terminations began. That evening, while I was unpacking boxes in the small rental house I'd moved into during the separation, Delphine Voss pounded on my door hard enough that my neighbor's porch light flicked on. She was yelling before I opened it, demanding I reverse every termination, promising, in front of God and my new neighbors, that I would regret ever touching what she considered rightfully hers. I looked at her, the way you look at whether you're no longer afraid of. You need to leave my property, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. She laughed, sharp and bitter, and told me I had no idea what I'd done. That the Voss family had built half the company, that 27 families now depended on those paychecks, families I was, in her words, starving out of spite. The only thing anyone starved, I told her, was my father's business, slowly, deliberately, for 6 years. There's a forensic report in my lawyer's office that proves every dollar of it. Her face changed, just slightly, a flicker under the fury. She understood. In that instant, I wasn't bluffing. She softened her voice next, the way she always did when yelling failed. Told me Reginald still loved me, that this could all be undone if I reconsidered the divorce, reinstated the employees, let bygones be bygones. She looked at me like I was still the person she'd spent 8 years quietly managing. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 11 months. I told her there was no version of reconsideration available to her, that the divorce was final, that the terminations were final, that if anyone wanted to contest it, they were welcome to do so in court, where the report would become public record. That was when she stopped yelling and started threatening lawsuits instead. I closed the door. My father used to say, sitting at that rattling desk, that a company is just people who decided to trust each other, and the day they stop trusting each other, it's not a company anymore. It's just a building. I always thought he meant something simple, something about teamwork. He meant something much heavier. He meant that trust has to be earned honestly, not assumed through marriage, not inherited through a shared last name. He meant that the moment you stop asking who deserves to be trusted, you've already handed your life's work to whoever asks the loudest. The lawsuit Delphine promised never materialized. Her lawyer reviewed the forensic report during discovery and quietly advised her that litigation would only invite a criminal fraud referral. Desmond and Preston left the state within 2 months. The shell company was dissolved before the year's end, the paper trail buried as fast as they could manage it. My father never pressed criminal charges, not for lack of evidence, but because he told me watching them lose everything they'd built on stolen ground was punishment enough. Marguerite still calls me every few months, just to check in. She has a new pair of reading glasses now. She still taps her pen twice before she says anything important. As for me, I still have that gray blazer. 6 months after the divorce, Callaway Steel Fabrication posted its strongest quarterly earnings in company history, staffed entirely by people who earned their positions rather than inherited them. My father named me president that spring, standing on the same warehouse floor, where he'd started the company nearly 40 years earlier. I think about him every time I walk that floor and hear the steel beams settle overhead with that same bell-like clang from my childhood, and I think, some inheritances aren't things you're given, they're things you have to fight to keep. If you've ever had to stay quiet to protect something you loved, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Tales. There are more to come.